This channel, like so many other horror narration channels, has been demonetized by YouTube. If you like what you hear and would like to support creepy ghost stories, then please consider joining my Patreon. The link is in the description. "Burn them all," he whispered, and I shuddered. I wanted to blame the autumnal air for those shivers, but it's my mentor's icy blue eyes that had me quaking like a leaf in the wind. His eyes were normally a dull shade of brown, but right now, they were as blue and as pale as a summer day without the warmth. Something was wrong with Jasper, but the doctor did say there would be some strangeness after the incident. I was expecting random spasms and shortness of temper, but not eyes changing colors and an obsession with burning leaves. Let me start over. A couple of weeks ago, Jasper was tending to the cemetery. Rain or no rain, Jasper's there every day to cater to those old, neglected tombs. He takes out the dead flowers, plucks the bad grass, the roots and all, so it doesn't come back, and he feeds the birds in the few trees left around. I can't say that I'm as devoted to my career as a gravedigger as Jasper is. And that day, the wind was nasty, and the rain felt like ice prickles hitting my face. So I decided to go into our shared cabin to prepare some coffee. The thunder was rumbling something fierce above our head, and so much it reminded me of what my father used to tell me. "Oh, the gods must be having a bowling party up there." I remember hearing my laugh reverberating against the empty walls of the cabin. And then, the accident happened. Jasper was lightning struck as I was making some warm coffee for his return. I saw it with my own two eyes as this sword of light fell down from the high heaven and hit him straight in the face. The light was so pure and blue that I nearly went blind staring at its reflection upon Jasper's bald head. I saw his body jerk and spasm while standing before he finally fell down. I rushed to his side, but didn't dare touch him, and as quickly as I could, I called for help. Now, mind you, Jasper isn't the prettiest old man around. In fact, he is quite crusty. His nose is long and crooked, his ears are pointed like some sort of goblin, and he might as well be one. He got the looks down to a T, except for the height. Jasper is one tall bastard, but despite not being the prettiest, he had never been this ugly. Half of his face was burnt on impact, and the scars that grew down his body like tree roots did nothing to pretty him up. When the doctor told me he would make it, I was flabbergasted. Well, I didn't think it could be. That old man with shaking bones and rheumatism couldn't possibly survive a lightning bolt to the face. But he did, and he was back at work less than a week later. They couldn't even help him at the hospital. He kept saying he had a job to do and no one else could do it. He even said to the nurse that I was a useless young chap that would never do any good in life and that he couldn't trust the corpses in the cemetery to someone like me. Yeah, classic, right? Well, he did always nag me about my lack of enthusiasm and devotion, but, unlike him, I didn't want to spend my life living in a cemetery. No. I rather like the living. I have never known him with a wife or child, nor house, which is why I think he's living in the old cabin. When it's time to leave at the end of our shift, he's the first to leave, and also the first to arrive in the morning. He's always wearing the same clothes, but surprisingly, he does have good hygiene. Except after the accident. And sometimes I walk by him, and he stinks like death. Stinks like he's rotting from the inside. I remember throwing a joke about wanting some rain again, and he simply gazed at me with his usual scorn, except that one was a lot creepier with the whole bandaging around his face. 2 weeks later, the bandages were gone. And let me tell you, I wish they didn't. The scars around his face were nothing short of disgusting. I could distinctively see the point where the lightning hit, where his skin melted and rippled like waves. It settled nastily, too. The scar tissue hardened that mess, and it looked like half his face was falling off. The edge of his left eye was drooping, and if he forgot to blink, you could see it getting crusty through the day. And I saw him apply the ointment to his scar, but it did nothing more than hydrate him. And I guess because the skin never got back up. The corner of his mouth was burnt as well, leaving his lips looking like deflated balloons. By respect for him, though, I didn't wince at the sight. No, not even once. And I went back home every night after the afternoon shift and washed my face with some cold water to try and get the sight of him away. And unfortunately, just like half his face, it was burnt behind my eyelids, seared into place to make sure I never forget. Heck, I couldn't touch my wife for days because each time I blinked, I saw his grilled face, and well, it turned me off. As I read about the string of disappearances in the newspaper one morning, my wife suggested I offered to take his place so he could finally retire. But I knew the old fool. He would never abandon his position until he was dead. What else would he do? He had no wife, he had no kids, nothing beside his job at the cemetery. And with his face looking like that, it was doubtful he'd find anything else. And needless to say, well, he'd make a terrible people greeter at Walmart. I love her, so I told her it was a good idea and that I'd try to talk to him about it, but I knew I wouldn't. It was completely useless. The next few days were not easier, with Jasper's behavior becoming stranger and stranger, and the fire department asking me to keep the leave burning to a minimum. I couldn't get a wink of rest. Apparently, every night since the lightning struck him, Jasper was devoting his time to raking the whole cemetery and setting fire to the leaves. It's September, and of course, the leaves piling up can be a problem for the tombstones, but when did he ever go to sleep anymore? And why didn't he look more tired? His features were gray and drawn, but wasn't that normal for a man his age? The dark circles under his eyes were no worse than they were before. But Jasper was a lot more aggressive with his demands. Usually, he never asked me for much. Told me to mow the lawn and make sure the flowers at the entrance were watered, but never much more. When I walked closer, there was this atrocious reek coming out of him again, like decay and putrefaction, or the copper smell of coagulating blood. It reminded me of the time I worked in a butcher shop, gutting pigs for a wage that was barely above the minimum. The stench of guts I could never forget. And right now, Jasper was smelling a bit like that one pig we left rotting in the sun for too long. I offered him water. He refused. I offered him food. He refused. I offered him a goddamn beer, his favorite, and he still refused. saying he already had lunch while I was wasting my time doing shit that didn't matter. Now, mind you, I was calling my wife and telling her I was going to be home early that night. As I was just about to leave, Jasper scared the crap out of me. He suddenly grabbed my arm and he looked absolutely out of his mind. His dull brown eyes had turned to ice and he whispered, "Burn them all. Burn them all." And I was so caught by his gaze that I barely noticed how cold his skin was. And it's only when he finally let go of me that I realized my skin had started to burn, like Blain. I clearly saw his fingers mark my skin for a couple of hours after that, and when I showed my wife, she said I was lying. Nobody can be cold enough to burn skin. He would be dead if that were the case. That night, I heard him whisper, "Burn them all," as I went to sleep and woke up to the sight of his now blue eyes behind my eyelids. I blinked it away, but I couldn't shake off the nasty feeling gnawing at my guts, telling me to quit and just join my father's fishing company instead. At least there, I would be working with the living. Even if I hate the fish smell, it can't be worse than the smell of death. Anyway, I kissed my wife goodbye this morning, and when I arrived at the cemetery, Jasper was arguing with the fire department. Apparently, last night's fire got so high, it licked the power lines. The fireman was trying to tell Jasper to be cautious, and all the old man replied was, "Someone needs to burn them all. Someone has to. It'll just spread if I don't." And I was starting to think his obsession with the leaves was going a bit too far. I separated the two before things devolved any further, and told the fireman that I would be the one taking care of the fires from now on. And Jasper, for the first time, gazed at me with something that looked like gratefulness and a bit of curiosity. And I didn't have time to question that look, as I was trying to politely redirect the fireman towards the exit. "Listen, Jasper, I know you're trying to keep the cemetery clean of leaves, but you just can't start a fire so big it'll reach the power lines. It's only leaves. What the fuck is wrong with you, man? Since the lightning, you haven't been the same." And it was time I asked some questions. And since his eyes were not going back to dull brown anytime soon, I wanted to know what kind of fucked up new Jasper I was dealing with. Jasper's gaze moved left and right, then right and left, then settled back on me. A nasty, creepy little smile twisted his deflated balloon lips, revealing a row of yellowish teeth to my sight. At this moment, I definitely thought he looked like a goblin. I heard him laugh, or I think it was a laugh. His face, though halfway melted, seemed to brighten up this morning. He mumbled something about showing me something later, and then we went back to work, but the unsettling feeling in the pit of my stomach didn't disappear. Even as I ate the delicious ham sandwich my wife made for me and downed a beer, I could still taste something bitter in the back of my throat. The taste of fear. And I don't know why, but I felt terrified. My instincts were calling me to leave, screaming at me to just pick up my stuff and go before the end of the day, but since I had nothing to lean on but a crazy, obsessed old man with burning leaves, I decided to stay. Part of me wanted to know what was happening with Jasper, though I've never really felt sympathy or friendship for the man. I still wanted to know what that lightning had done to him. I strived on for the rest of the day and raked the leaves for Jasper when he told me to. Then I shoved them in carton bags and brought them out back to where we burned them. As I walked to the fire pit, I noticed something was off. The fire circle was a lot bigger than usual, and the pile of ashes was, I don't know, just different. I saw branches sticking out from the ashes and thought nothing of it, but there was just something incredibly eerie about the cemetery's backyard. I felt like I had never seen that place, even though I've been working with Jasper for about half a year already. I walked closer and realized why my system was on alert all day. Amidst the leaf ashes, there were bones. Not just any sort of bones, human bones. I could distinctly see a femur, and I had never gone to medical school to know that a bone that size cannot belong to a squirrel or any other kind of rodent that lives in the cemetery. I could barely trust what I could see, so I gave a kick and the ashes raised from the ground in a disgusting dark cloud, revealing more and more burnt fragments of what was human. Or 2. Or 3. How many bones were there? The more I kicked around, the more I found. My heart rose in my throat as I found a necklace amidst the ashes. And I recognized it, since I remember seeing it in the newspaper, around the neck of a 23-year-old woman who had just disappeared last week. I turned around to leave, and Jasper was a meter behind me, wearing a long black coat. I could see the sun setting in the distance, and I lowered my gaze for a second on Jasper's shadow. With his long, crooked nose and his cloak, his shadow looked like that of a plague doctor. I swallowed heavily and remained silent as he took a step forward, and I a step back. "Burn them all," he whispered, and I shuddered. I wanted to blame the autumnal air and the burnt bones cracking beneath my soles as I walked back. But what truly terrified me was Jasper's smile and his icy blue eyes. When he opened his mouth, I saw a worm on his tongue and dirt falling off his parched lips. He looked deader than a doornail, and yet he was walking toward me, his gaze fixed on my person. "Burn them all, so it doesn't spread. The corpses, they carry it, you know." I've never run faster in my life. I ran home, told my wife, and called the cops on Jasper. The cops found the remains, but they never found him.